Hi everyone, I'm continuing my idea of making a YouTube video to go along with each of my Instagram posts. So today I wanted to talk about one of my Instagram posts which is focused on the legend or folktale of King Arthur being buried, of King Arthur sleeping in a cave with his knights, ready to awaken at Britain's most dire point. So this seems like something which is just completely fictional, complete fantasy. It doesn't seem like there could possibly be any historical basis for it. But there's a record of something that took place supposedly in the 6th century, which I think could well be the origin of this folktale. Before we go into that record, I want to cover a few details about what the records tell us about Arthur's death, because this is important, okay? So, according to the earliest records of Arthur's death, other than the Welsh annals, he was taken away, after being mortally wounded, he was taken away by boat to some mysterious Isle of Avalon. And then in slightly later records, he's described as being buried underneath a newly built chapel. So those are two details. It's not a lot to work with, but we can also include the date into that. So according to my estimates, which admittedly are very different to other people's, Arthur died in about 579. I know most people put his death at about 540, but I disagree. You can see the full explanation for why in my book, King Arthur, the Man Who Conquered Europe. But just to give you one piece of evidence, there's a record of Arthur killing the brother of Gildas while Gildas is in Ireland, and then Gildas returns to Britain to make peace with Arthur. But Gildas was in Ireland, according to the life of Gildas and according to the Welsh annals, in the 560s. So that would mean that Arthur was still alive in the 560s, which means he couldn't have died in 540. So that's one piece of evidence. There's a lot more, which, like I said, you can see in my book. But anyway, to move on, the point is my estimates place Arthur's death in 579. So that's the date, the fact he was taken away by boat, and the fact he ended up being buried underneath a newly built chapel. So that's what we've got to work with. Now those details about his death could be fictional, but let's just consider them and see where they lead us. Now, there's the record I was talking about earlier, dating from the 9th century. It appears in the Wonders of Britain, and it concerns Illtyd. It's a record of Illtyd living as a hermit in a cave. And then one day, these men arrive by boat, carrying the body of a very holy man. And they secretly bury him in the cave that Illtyd is living in. And then a bit later, they built a church around the body. Presumably they've taken the body out of the cave by this point. So that's peculiar. They don't mention the name of the holy man. Well, they tell Illtyd, but it's not mentioned in the account. The account never tells us who this holy man is. So it's mysterious, evidently very important, holy man being secretly buried. Who could this be? Well, this, according to my estimates, happens just at the same time as Arthur's death, because Illtyd died in about 580, so about the same time as Arthur, according to my estimates. But this account, this particular event in his life, is placed almost right at the end of the life of St. Illtyd, which would indicate it was one of the last events in his life. So the timing fits perfectly for it to be Arthur. Also, the fact that this body is taken to Illtyd by boat rather than over land would tie in very well with this concept of Arthur being taken away by boat to the Isle of Avalon after he was mortally wounded, almost like it's the other end of the journey. Also, the fact that this body, this holy man, had a church built over him shortly after he was buried would fit very well, perfectly in fact, with the records that describe Arthur being buried underneath a newly built chapel. So all the pieces of evidence, all the details, not pieces of evidence, all the details that we have about Arthur's death all match perfectly with the details of the burial of this very holy man in Ulfdid's time. So I think on that basis there's very good reason to believe that this very holy man was actually Arthur, and that his body was taken to Ilfdid, his cousin, to be buried secretly in the cave. So bearing that in mind, if that's the case, then that would mean that Arthur was secretly buried in a cave. I think if that really happened, and if this body really was Arthur's body, that could well be the explanation, the origin behind the folk tale of Arthur sleeping in a cave. So that's my theory. Like last time, I'll post a description to the Instagram post. I'll post a link to the Instagram post in the description, and I'll also post a link to my book as well, where you can buy that, so you can read the full explanation of why I place Arthur a lot later than most people. I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks.